Rain falls hard on the coast of Maine. Inside a small, worn cabin, a rescue dog named Harbor suddenly stands up, ears alert, guarding a mother and her little boy. Something moves under the floor. The light flickers, and a small red glow shines through the cracks like a heartbeat. What they thought was a safe home is hiding a secret, one that connects them to a lost father, an old experiment, and a quiet miracle that refuses to fade. In that moment of fear and faith, one loyal dog will show that God still works in small, silent ways, and sometimes his angels walk on four legs with scars that tell a story. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your country below. And if you believe that no person or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe, share this story, and help someone remember that hope is still real. The fog over Owl's Head, Maine, hung thick and stubborn that morning, swallowing the trees, the road, and even the distant light of the bay. Wind carried the smell of salt and wet pine, the kind that sticks to skin and breathes through clothes. The old blue pickup truck rattled along the narrow road, its headlights cutting through pale gray like blades through wool. Rowan Blake drove with both hands steady on the wheel. She was 35, tall and strong from years of work with her hands, calloused palms, long arms, a practical sort of grace. Her dark brown hair was tied back with a rubber band, but the damp air pulled it free in strands that brushed her cheeks. Her face bore the marks of exhaustion and wind, faint lines at the corners of her eyes, a jaw set by habit, and a kind of quiet endurance that came from grief, not age. Beside her, Eli, her 7-year-old son, sat with his knees tucked up in his puffy red jacket. He was a little boy, small, wiry, and still soft around the face, with freckles dusted across his nose. His hair, the color of chestnut bark, stuck out beneath a knit hat, and his pale blue eyes followed the fog outside the window, as if searching for something familiar. He held a stuffed orca in one hand, its tail nearly worn off from being carried everywhere. Eli didn't speak much during long drives. He liked to hum, a quiet, tuneless murmur that filled the space between silence and worry. "You doing okay, bud?" Rowan asked without turning her head. Eli nodded. "It's colder than Boston. It'll be warmer inside the cabin," she said. "We'll start the stove first thing." He looked down at the orca and whispered, "Does it smell like the ocean?" She smiled faintly. "Everything here smells like the ocean." The sign for Owl's Head, 2 miles, appeared through the fog, its paint half peeled, and the road dipped toward the coast. The town emerged in pieces, a bait shop with windows clouded in salt, a cluster of wooden houses leaning against the wind, and a small diner with a red neon sign blinking the lighthouse pie. Rowan slowed the truck and parked in front. "Breakfast first," she said. The bell over the diner door jingled as they stepped in. The warmth hit them instantly. Coffee, cinnamon, and the heavy smell of frying butter. Behind the counter stood a tall woman with a silver bob and a steady presence. Her name tag read Marlene Hicks. Her skin was weathered and her eyes gray-blue like the sea on a calm day. "You two look half frozen," she said, grabbing 2 mugs from a rack. "Coffee for Mom, cocoa for the young man. Sit anywhere you like." Eli climbed into a booth, small boots thumping against the vinyl seat. Marlene brought their drinks, then set down a slice of apple pie topped with melting whipped cream. "First piece on the house," she said. "It's tradition when new folks move in. You're the ones who bought that $7 cabin, aren't you?" Rowan smiled politely. "Word travels fast." Marlene shrugged, leaning her elbows on the counter. "Not much else to talk about in Owl's Head. That cabin's old, good bones, but the roof's got a limp. Keep a hammer handy." "We will," Rowan said. She glanced at Eli, who was quietly dissecting the pie with his spoon, expression serious as a scientist. When they finished, Marlene packed them each a small paper bag, 2 biscuits and a slice of leftover pie. "For later," she said. "The fog tends to make people hungry." By the time they reached Lighthouse Road, the drizzle had thickened into mist. The trees pressed closer, tall spruces dripping with moisture. The cabin appeared where the gravel ended, crouched between 2 pines that seemed to lean toward it in sympathy. Its roof sagged slightly under years of weather, and one shutter dangled by a single hinge. Rowan parked, killed the engine, and sat a moment, listening to the truck tick as it cooled. "Well," she said, exhaling. "Home sweet something." Eli peered out the window. "It looks sad." "Then we'll fix that," she said, reaching over to tousle his hair. The key from the county office turned reluctantly in the rusted lock. The door opened with a tired creak, releasing a mix of damp air and dust. The inside was small, one open room, a cold stove in the corner, and a loft barely big enough for a mattress. The air smelled of wood rot and rain that had found its way through the roof. Rowan set down a box labeled First Night, pulling out a lantern, a hammer, and a folded blanket. "We'll make it work," she murmured. Eli explored, cautious but curious. His footsteps echoed on the bare floorboards. Near the window, he crouched and touched something dark on the planks. "Mom," he said, "there's mud here. And hair." Rowan knelt beside him. The marks looked like muddy paw prints, faded but distinct, leading from the door toward the far wall. She brushed her fingers along the floor. The wood was cold and slightly damp. "Probably a raccoon got in," she said, though her voice didn't sound entirely sure. Eli leaned closer, peering through a small crack in the boards. "I heard something," he whispered. "What kind of something?" "Scratching." Rowan held her breath. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind outside. Then, faintly came the noise again, deliberate, rhythmic, like claws dragging against wood. She rose quietly and fetched her tool bag, pulling out a pry bar. "Stay behind me," she said. Eli obeyed, hugging his stuffed orca tight. Rowan knelt and slipped the pry bar under one of the loose boards. The nail squealed as it lifted. Cold air rose from below, carrying a sharp smell of salt and fur. Something shifted in the darkness beneath the floor. Two amber eyes caught the lantern light. A German shepherd crouched in the narrow crawl space, large, thin, and trembling. Its coat was thick but tangled with mud. One hind leg held off the ground. The dog stared back, alert but not feral. It didn't snarl or lunge, only watched, chest heaving. "Oh," Rowan breathed, "you poor thing." Eli's voice came small and hesitant. "Is he hurt?" "I think so." The dog's ears flicked toward the sound, its nose working the air. It caught their scent, coffee, soap, and rain. Its body loosened slightly, though its eyes never left them. Rowan lowered her voice, steady and soft. "It's okay, boy. You're safe now." The animal blinked once, slow and deliberate, then lowered its head to the floor, as if deciding, for now, to trust the quiet. Eli crouched beside her, his small hand resting on her sleeve. "He's been waiting," he whispered. Rowan looked at him, then at the dog beneath the floorboards, then at the sagging cabin around them. "Maybe he has," she said. Outside, the fog thickened, pressing close against the windows. Inside, for the first time since Jonah's death, Rowan heard another living heartbeat under her roof. By the time Rowan found the matches, her hands had gone stiff from the cold rising out of the floor. The lantern balanced on a crate through a steady circle of light across the room, pushing the fog back to the windows and making the shadows look contained instead of feral. She stuffed crumpled newsprint into the pot-bellied stove, laid down kindling like a small rib cage, and coaxed a flame to life. The stove took its time, metal ticking, then gave a low, approving hum as the first heat moved into the room. "We need to make it warm for him," she said, not looking away from the door she'd opened in the floor. Eli stood a step behind her, a little boy arranged in a careful posture of courage, knees slightly bent inside his puffy red jacket, chin up, because he had decided that's what bravery looks like when somebody else is watching. His knit hat had drifted crooked again, and he hadn't noticed. He clutched the worn orca in one hand and kept the other hand on her sleeve, not clinging, just there like a knot in a rope. "Is he cold under there?" he asked. "He is," Rowan said. "The floor takes the heat right out of you." The dog in the crawl space watched them without moving. Up close, she could see the slick along his flank where wet mud had dried into plates, the way one hind leg hovered an inch off the ground to cheat the pain, the shallow rate of his breathing. She slid the pry bar aside so the lifted boards made a wider doorway away without closing suddenly. "I'm going to get water," she said softly. "You can talk to him, but keep your hands where he can see them." Eli nodded, small and solemn. "Hi," he told the shadows. "We're fixing the stove. It's old, but it works. My mom can make things work." The corner of Rowan's mouth lifted despite herself. She filled a bowl from the jug in the box marked First Night and set it on the floor 2 feet from the opening. The cool, mineral smell of clean water slipped under the boards. The dog's nostrils twitched, a single intake. After a second try, he inched forward, a controlled drag that kept weight off the bad leg. The wedge of his head came into the light, broad skull, straight muzzle wet with condensation, whiskers catching the lantern glow like wire. He sniffed, paused, then reached and lapped once, twice, then committed to a steady drink that sounded like a promise taking shape. Rowan let her breath out slow. Up close, the ink inside his left ear was clearer. Letters and numbers rendered in a technician's blunt hand. Not a pet store tattoo, the kind you see on dogs who worked for a living. "You see it?" she asked Eli. "The mark?" Eli leaned close and squinted with care. "It's letters," he whispered, "like a name that's hiding." "We'll ask someone who can read it," Rowan said. "After we clean him up, and if," she corrected herself gently, "when he lets us help." The stove found its stride, heat lifting in soft waves that reached the boards, and the boy first, then the dog. The German Shepherd finished the water, nosed the bowl toward them, because habits are hard to break, then fixed his attention on the room again. He didn't drop his guard, but he didn't rebuild the wall either. Rowan took the folded blanket from the box and set it on the floor near the opening, then eased herself down to sit cross-legged, with her hands open on her knees. The dog's eyes moved to her face and held. "He needs food," Eli said. "He does," Rowan agreed, "but slow, or it will upset his stomach." From the box she found a can of plain chicken, drained it into a small bowl, and mashed it with warm water. The smell was simple and honest. She slid the bowl forward inch by inch until the dog could reach without stepping into the room. He ate with a contained hunger that was somehow more polite than desperate. "We should call someone," Rowan said after a minute. "A deputy, or animal control." She glanced at the phone. No bars. "I'll try out front." On the porch, the fog had loosened, trading white out for a peel of gray that showed the dark line of trees. Rowan raised the phone high like a flag and found a single bar that flickered, then settled. She thumbed the diner's number from the receipt for the pie, and Marlene's voice came warm and level, like a stove running steady. "Lighthouse Pie. It's Rowan Blake. We've got a dog under the floor. Big, scared, hurt. He has a tattoo in his ear." "Then you want Deputy Quinn," Marlene said. "Nora knows dogs and people in equal measure. I'll call her. Sit tight and keep that stove going." "Thanks." "Bring him in close to the heat if he'll have you," Marlene added. "Nora's 10 minutes away if the ridge isn't a skating rink." Back inside, Eli had moved the bowl a hair to keep the water within reach. He looked up like he'd been caught doing something that mattered, which he had. "He finished," he reported. "We called for help," Rowan said. "A deputy. She knows dogs." "Will she take him?" "She'll help us do right by him," Rowan said. And because Eli's mouth pulled doubtfully to one side, she added, "We'll decide together." The knock came exactly when Marlene had predicted. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. The woman on the porch had the clean geometry of someone who lives half her life outdoors. Late 30s, 5'9" or so, compact shoulders under a duty jacket, auburn hair pulled into a low braid that had escaped enough wisps to show she'd been in weather already. Her face wore the kind of friendliness that doesn't ask for anything back. A frank mouth, steady eyes too pale to name blue or green, and a thin white scar that bisected her left eyebrow, the kind of mark earned by running toward the wrong thing at speed and not quite ducking in time. "Deputy Nora Quinn," she said, showing the badge and keeping her hands where anyone, on the other side of the door, could read her intentions. "Marlene said you've got a situation under the floor." "Rowan Blake," Rowan said, stepping back. "This is my son, Eli." Eli straightened, small palms smoothing his jacket by habit. Nora crouched to come level with him. "Hey, Eli," she said in a voice tuned to a child with one foot still in the storm water. "I'm going to help your mom, and I'm going to try to help your dog. We'll let him tell us what he needs." She didn't ask to be led. She followed the heat and the smell of wet dog to the open floor, then settled on her heels at the edge of light and waited, hands open on her knees the way Rowan had. "Evening," she said to the dark. "Name's Nora." The shepherd's eyes held her, measuring. Nora didn't lean in. She let the dog measure however long he needed to. "You see this?" she said quietly after a moment, angling her head so Rowan could see what she saw without crowding the opening. "Left ear. That's departmental ink. State SAR program used those groups of letters 10 years back. Royal blue dye ages to this color." She tugged a penlight from her chest pocket and rested it on the plank like an offering, not a tool. "If he's who I think, he was trained for scent and area sweep." A shadow passed over Nora's face and then was gone. "My last partner was a shepherd. Different lines, smart and stubborn, saved my life and did not let me forget it." "What happened?" Eli asked, in the straightforward way little boys ask the core question without ceremony. Nora's mouth tilted, not quite a smile. He got old, she said, which is what we hope for everyone we love. She unzipped a small canvas pouch and took out gauze, a bottle labeled saline, and a roll of cohesive bandage. I'm going to ask him to come forward, she said. Not to Rowan, but to the dog. I won't touch him without asking again. She slid a palm across the floor, then curled her fingers back to herself, an old handler's signal. The shepherd's ears tipped, and something in him recognized the grammar. He inched forward until his shoulders pushed into the light. Up close, the injury was visible, swelling along the hock, a shallow cut crusted with mud, no puncture, no bone showing, the kind of damage that comes from catching your foot and wrenching it hard. Nora moved slow enough that no animal or human could mistake her intention. Saline to clean, pressure to stop the ooze, then wrap just enough to remind him not to use it, she narrated for Eli's benefit and maybe for Rowan's. While she cleaned, the dog held himself still, except for a tremor along the muscle of his thigh. He did not snap. He did not show teeth. He watched the boy watching him. He's brave, Eli said. Yes, Nora said, and tired of being brave alone. We thought his name might be Harbor, Rowan said, surprising herself by saying it aloud, like naming. Something gives you permission to keep it safe. Nora didn't look up from the work. Fits, she said. A harbor is a place you go when the water stops being a good idea. It's also a verb. You can harbor a friend. She finished the wrap and sat back on her heels to let the dog see she was done. After a long, quiet moment, the shepherd slid one paw, then the other, onto the plank and lifted his head into the room. The move was not a step so much as a declaration. I am here. Rowan felt the house answer, wood settling, stove breathing, something aligning that had not aligned for some time. Nora stood slowly, joints cracking a little in the way of people who kneel on cold floors professionally. I can log him as found and place him with animal control, she said, tone strictly informational. Or I can file him under temporary guardian here, if you want to foster while we look for his handler or his last assignment. If he's got departmental ink, there will be records, but they won't be quick. We'll foster, Rowan said before her fear could suggest the opposite. If he'll have us. The dog looked from one to the other, then leaned forward and put his chin on Eli's knee with the gravity of a courtroom oath. Eli startled, then steadied, one small palm flattening on the shepherd's head like he was testing the idea of ownership and being owned. Harbor, he said, in a voice that respected the name. Nora's shoulders lowered a fraction. All right, she said. I'll bring a chip scanner by in the morning and run the ear code through our old rings. In the meantime, keep him dry, small meals, no stairs. If he chooses that couch, let him have the couch. She wrote a number on a torn page from her notebook and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lobster. Call me if the swelling climbs or if he won't bear weight tomorrow. At the door, she paused to look back the way working people sometimes do before leaving a scene. Inventory made, nothing obvious missed. You did right, she said to Rowan. Most folks board it back up and tell themselves it was raccoons. I thought about it, Rowan said. Then he looked at me. That'll do it, Nora said. Dogs like this are professional persuaders. When the deputy's taillights disappeared into the weather, the cabin felt different, not bigger, not warmer exactly, but more decided. Harbor hauled his front half up and out, and stood with his good leg touching Eli's boot. He tested weight, thought better of it, and allowed Rowan to guide him, no, not guide, invite him, toward the couch. He folded himself there with a care that spoke to training. On, not over, stillness, not sprawl. Eli fetched the blanket and laid it across Harbor's shoulders in the wondering, imprecise way little boys act when they suddenly find themselves in charge of something that breathes. Rowan set a fresh bowl of water by the couch and sat on. The floor beside it, back against the frame, feeling the heat from the stove on her face and the cold from the floor against her knees. She took the ring on its chain between her fingers and pressed it once. Not goodbye. Not hello. Something in between that you say when the next hour is better than the last one, and that's enough for now. Outside, the fog thinned to a dull, steady rain. Inside, the stove worked. The boy watched over the dog, and the dog watched the door. The quietly moving parts of a new household found their cadence. When Eli finally leaned against her shoulder, weight heavy with the relief of permission to rest, Rowan stroked his hair back and said what the room had already figured out. We'll do this together. By morning, the rain had turned from drizzle to a steady, cold percussion that tapped against the tin roof and made the cabin seem smaller. It was the kind of sound that could lull a person into calm or pull them toward the edge of restlessness, depending on what they carried inside. Rowan woke before dawn out of habit, the way people who've lived through long uncertainty do. For a while, she lay still, listening. The rhythm of rain, the stove ticking low in its belly, and the deep, even breathing of a child and a dog not far apart. Eli slept curled on the old couch, blanket pulled up to his chin, one hand resting on Harbor's thick fur. The dog lay still except for the occasional twitch of an ear. His body filled most of the couch, a heavy, reassuring weight. The leg Nora had wrapped was stiff, but the swelling had gone down. When Harbor shifted, a low grunt escaped him, not of pain exactly, more of effort. Rowan stirred the fire, added 2 logs, and set the kettle on top. She moved quietly, pulling her coat over her shoulders, hair still damp from yesterday's rain. The mirror by the door caught her reflection, pale face, dark circles, but eyes clearer than the night before. There was a kind of fragile steadiness returning. When she opened the door to fetch more wood from the stack outside, a gust of wind brought in a blast of wet air and pine needles. The world was gray and slick, the gravel drive now a shallow stream. In the distance, fog moved over the bay like breath. She spotted the patrol SUV parked at the bottom of the road. Deputy Nora Quinn stepped out, pulling her hood tight, coffee in one hand, a metal case in the other. "Morning," Nora called, voice carrying through the rain. "Morning," Rowan replied, meeting her halfway. Up close, Nora looked the same as the night before, auburn braid tucked under the hood, eyes calm but alert. Her uniform was damp around the cuffs, and she moved like someone used to being wet half her life. "Brought the scanner," Nora said, lifting the case. "And some breakfast sandwiches from Marlene, her way of making sure you don't forget her diner exists." Rowan smiled faintly. "She's impossible to forget." Inside, Harbor lifted his head the moment Nora stepped in. His ears twitched, body tensing for an instant, then easing when he recognized her scent. He stayed down but alert, eyes following her every move. "Morning, partner," Nora said softly, crouching beside him. "Let's see what story you've got written under that ear." She opened the case, pulled out a small handheld scanner, and ran it near the tattoo. The machine chirped once, then displayed a code. Nora's eyes narrowed. "This is interesting," she murmured. "He's not just state SAR. This one's federal issue, Homeland Rescue Division, retired, maybe reclassified. I'll check the system when I get back to the station, but he's seen more than just forest rescues." Rowan frowned. "Federal? What would a federal rescue dog be doing under our floor?" "That," Nora said, standing, "is the question." Eli stirred awake, blinking, hair flattened to one side. "Did he eat?" he asked. Rowan nodded. "A little chicken and rice. You hungry?" He nodded again, rubbing his eyes. Nora handed him one of the breakfast sandwiches. "From Marlene. Don't tell her I gave it away or she'll charge me double." Eli smiled. A real one this time, and unwrapped the sandwich, the smell of egg and bacon filling the air. While he ate, Nora wrote notes in a small leather pad, neat and deliberate. "If his file's active, someone will call about him within a week. If not, you've got yourself a retired hero with no paperwork." She looked at Rowan. "Either way, you're safe keeping him. He trusts you now, that's not nothing." "Trust works both ways," Rowan said. Nora gave a half smile. "You're not wrong. Listen, the Ridge Road's flooding. If you need supplies, do it today before the temperature drops tonight. Forecast says sleet. I'll head into town later." "Good. And keep him dry. That leg needs rest." When Nora left, Harbor followed her to the door and stood there for a long moment, watching the SUV disappear into the mist. Then he padded back to the couch and dropped down with a huff. Eli finished eating, then looked toward the window. "Can we go outside when it stops raining?" "We'll see," Rowan said. "You can help me fix the door frame first. Deal?" He nodded, clearly proud of being included. The rest of the morning passed in quiet rhythm. The hammering of nails, the hiss of boiling water, and the low hum of Eli talking to Harbor, as though the dog were a classmate who needed explanations for everything. Rowan patched a leak above the window and scrubbed mildew from the corners, the cabin slowly losing its smell of neglect. Around midday, the sound of an approaching engine cut through the rain. Rowan stepped onto the porch. A pickup truck pulled in, old, red, with a dented tailgate. The man who climbed out looked to be in his mid-50s, solidly built with a weathered face and a gray beard trimmed close. He wore a dark beanie and a fisherman's jacket that had seen years of hard salt air. "You must be the new folks," he said, voice rough but not unkind. "Name's Caleb Shore. Live about half a mile up. Saw the deputy's car this morning, thought I'd check in. People get lost out here faster than they think." Rowan shook his hand. His grip was firm, his palms rough from rope and wood. "Appreciate it. I'm Rowan Blake, my son, Eli." Caleb nodded toward Eli, who stood shyly behind the doorframe. "You like boats, kid? I build little ones for the tourist shop in Rockland. Come by sometime. I'll show you how to sand the hulls smooth." Eli's eyes brightened. "Really? Really?" Caleb said, smiling beneath the beard. "Used to take my grandson fishing before he moved down south. Miss having a helper." Harbor padded up beside Rowan, tail low but curious. The dog sniffed the air, then relaxed slightly. Caleb bent his knees a bit, careful not to crowd. "That's a fine shepherd," he said. "Looks like he's been through it, though." "He has," Rowan said. "Found him under the floorboards yesterday." Caleb whistled softly. "Well, that's a story waiting to be told." He turned his gaze toward the tree line. "These woods keep secrets. Storm 2 winters ago took half the old ranger outpost down. Some dogs were never recovered from the training kennels they had out here years back. Maybe he wandered from there." Rowan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "That's possible," she said carefully. Caleb shifted the weight on his boots. "Anyway, welcome to the neighborhood. You'll hear the bay long before you see it. She's loud when she wants attention." He gave Harbor one last look. "Good dog like that chooses you for a reason." After he drove off, Rowan watched the tire tracks fade in the mud. The world was still gray but softer now, like the fog had decided to keep its distance. By evening, the rain eased. Rowan sat on the porch, a mug of coffee steaming between her hands. Eli lay on the floor inside, drawing with a blunt pencil. Harbor stretched beside him. The boy was tracing shapes that looked like waves, and every so often he'd stop, erase, and start again. "What are you drawing?" Rowan asked. "A boat," Eli said. "Like Mr. Caleb's. Maybe it can carry Harbor." "Maybe it can," she said, smiling. Inside, the dog stirred. His eyes followed the movement of her voice, soft but intent, as if cataloging every new tone. For the first time, he rested his chin on his paws and gave a small sigh, the sound of an animal beginning to believe in safety again. That night, Rowan wrote a short note on a scrap of paper and pinned it to the fridge beside Nora's number. "Supplies tomorrow. Check Harbor's bandage. Ask about SAR files." When she turned off the lantern, the cabin settled into darkness. Outside, the wind had moved north, brushing the roof with pine needles. Inside, 3 shapes, woman, child, and dog, formed the quiet geometry of a family not yet whole, but learning its new edges. The next morning brought a deceptive calm. The storm had moved east, leaving the air sharp and cold, and the sky stretched wide and washed out above the pines. The ground still shone with puddles that reflected light like broken glass. Rowan stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, breath visible, watching Harbor limp through the yard in measured steps. His gait was uneven but stronger. Each time he paused to test his weight, she caught herself holding her breath. Eli appeared behind her, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up like static. "He's better," he said softly. "Getting there," Rowan replied. "He's tougher than he looks." The boy leaned on the railing, staring toward the tree line. "Do you think he remembers where he came from?" Rowan considered that. "Maybe, but I think he's deciding if he wants to remember." The morning passed in its quiet rhythm, Rowan fixing the gutter, Eli drawing on the porch, Harbor resting near the steps. Around mid-morning, the sound of tires crunching over gravel reached them. A green pickup stopped at the foot of the drive, and Deputy Nora Quinn stepped out again, this time in plain clothes. Jeans, brown jacket, the same braid pulled through the back of a cap. She carried a file folder tucked under her arm. "Morning," she called. "Didn't mean to drop in unannounced, but I've got something you'll want to see." Inside, she set the folder on the table and pulled out 2 documents and a photograph. A training yard half collapsed under snow, kennels lined in a semicircle, the word Homeland Rescue Division, Coastal Unit 14, stenciled on a signpost. The photo had a dull, official quality, the kind that turned human work into inventory. "This was the outpost Caleb mentioned," Nora said, "closed 5 years ago after the federal contract ended. When that storm hit 2 winters back, part of the property flooded. The report lists 3 missing canines from the kennels. One of them, she pointed to the number printed beneath the dog's name, matches Harbor's code. Eli leaned in. So, it is him? It is, Nora said. His registered name was K9 Harbor, trained for water rescue and recovery operations. He worked mostly off the Columbia Inlet, storms, flood zones, missing vessels. He was retired, officially, after an injury on duty, but the paperwork ends there. Rowan frowned. How does a trained rescue dog end up under my floor? That's the part that doesn't fit, Nora said. The outpost was evacuated, but records show he was reassigned before the flood. There's no trace of where. The silence stretched until Eli broke it. Maybe he came home. Nora smiled gently. Maybe he did. Before leaving, Nora slid a card across the table. The property's still federal, but the structure's half collapsed. If you're up for it, I can get permission for you and Harbor to look around. Sometimes closure comes with seeing where something ended. Rowan hesitated, then nodded. All right. They left after lunch. The drive wound along a dirt road swallowed by pines, the air dense with the smell of wet bark. The forest grew wilder the farther they went, moss on every trunk, fallen branches thick as ribs across the path. Harbor rode in the back seat, head resting on the window ledge, eyes fixed forward. When they reached the gate, Nora climbed out and unlocked the rusted chain. The outpost sat in a clearing that might once have been orderly. The training yard was a patchwork of mud and grass, kennels standing like broken teeth, roofs collapsed inward. The signs still hung, though the letters had peeled to ghosts of blue paint. Everything smelled of old wood, damp earth, and a faint, sour trace of metal. Eli slipped his hand into Rowan's. It's sad here, he whispered. It is, she said. Nora moved ahead, boots sinking into the soft ground. Watch your step. Some of these boards are hollow. She crouched near a collapsed kennel door, tracing the serial plate with a gloved finger. This one's Harbor's unit, she said quietly. He was stationed here for 3 years. Harbor approached slowly, sniffing the air. His tail lowered but didn't tuck. He nosed the edge of the kennel, then the ground in front of it. A low sound came from his throat, not a growl, something softer, like a question. He pawed at a half-buried tarp and unearthed a metal bowl, its rim rusted. Rowan knelt, brushing mud from the engraving. HRD 14K9H. He remembers, she whispered. Nora looked around the site, scanning. He's tracking something, she said. Let him lead. Harbor moved deliberately, following an invisible thread between debris piles and downed fencing until he stopped at the edge of a shallow gully. The slope dropped to where floodwater had carved through the soil. He stood there, tail stiff, ears tilted forward. His chest rose fast, nostrils flaring. Rowan crouched beside him. What is it, boy? Harbor took one cautious step forward, then another, until his paw struck metal. He barked once, sharp, insistent. Nora slid down beside them and cleared away the leaves. Beneath, half buried, was a small cylindrical canister, stainless steel, its lid dented but intact. The tag welded to its side read, Evidence Locker Transfer Unit, HRD Internal Use Only. Nora exhaled. That's not standard training gear. She took the canister and wiped it clean, the engraved serial number catching the light. This belonged to the division's logistics branch. If it's been out here since the flood, it's not supposed to be. Do you think it's dangerous? Rowan asked. Not likely, Nora said, but I'll take it back for analysis. Harbor found this for a reason. Eli looked up at her. Maybe he was trying to tell us something. Nora nodded. Animals remember differently than we do. Sometimes they hold on to unfinished work. They stayed another hour, walking the perimeter. Most of the buildings were gutted. Metal frames, piles of splintered wood, the remains of kennels. But on the far end of the property, near where the forest thickened again, Rowan noticed a sign half buried in mud. She wiped the dirt away and read the faded letters. Training Hall, B, restricted personnel only. Inside, the roof had collapsed in places, but on one wall, still visible beneath soot and grime, were rows of photographs, handlers with their dogs. Some faces had water damage, others missing corners. Near the center, under a layer of dust, was a photo that stopped Rowan cold. A man in a gray rescue uniform stood beside a German shepherd, Harbor, their posture identical, alert, poised. The man's name tag read J. Blake. Rowan's breath caught. She touched the glass. That's my husband. Nora turned sharply. Your husband worked here? He was part of Coast Search, Rowan said, her voice faint. He trained alongside federal teams, but he never told me he worked with their dogs. She traced the image again. He must have known Harbor. Eli's voice came small, reverent. Then Harbor knew Dad. The air felt heavier. Nora looked between the photo and the dog, who now sat at attention before the wall, eyes fixed on the picture. That explains how he ended up under your cabin, she said quietly. He wasn't running from something, he was finding his way back. Rowan closed her eyes for a moment, letting the realization settle like a tide turning. The silence of the hall was deep, broken only by the steady sound of rain dripping through cracks in the roof. When they finally left, Nora locked the gate behind them. Harbor climbed into the truck willingly this time, curling up against Eli's legs. The boy rested his hand on the dog's head, saying nothing. On the drive home, Rowan kept her eyes on the winding road, the forest sliding past like memory. Somewhere between the sound of tires and rain, she felt a weight lift, not gone, but lighter, shared. That night, she stood by the window long after Eli and Harbor had fallen asleep. The sky over Owl's Head was clear, stars faint but visible between branches. In the reflection of the glass, her face looked softer. Behind her, the outline of the couch, the dog, the boy, glowed faintly in the firelight. She whispered, "You found your way home, didn't you?" Outside, the pines shifted in the wind, and the night, for the first time, did not feel empty. 2 days after visiting the abandoned outpost, the air over Owl's Head shifted again. The cold had sharpened. The sky pressed low with thin, hard clouds that promised more than they delivered. The kind of weather that made everything creak. Wood, bone, memory. Rowan sat at the kitchen table with the metal canister between her hands, the one Harbor had unearthed. Its surface was scuffed and pitted, the label nearly unreadable. She had scrubbed it clean with a rag until the stamped words HRD Internal Archive Unit 7B appeared faintly under the light. She didn't know why she kept it on the table, instead of giving it back to Nora right away. Maybe because it had been Harbor who found it, or maybe because she was afraid of what it might hold. Eli sat opposite her, coloring quietly. His drawing was simple, a dog on a dock, the water drawn with crooked blue lines. "Do you think Dad and Harbor worked here?" he asked without looking up. Rowan hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "I think they did." Harbor lifted his head from where he lay by the stove. His ears twitched at the sound of her voice, and he exhaled a slow, almost human sigh. The scarred ear with the tattoo caught the light like an old badge. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted her thoughts. Rowan looked through the window. A dark blue SUV was pulling up. Not Nora's patrol vehicle, but something sleeker, official. The man who stepped out wore a dark wool coat, not a uniform. He was tall, late 40s maybe, with salt and pepper hair cropped short, and a face that had known years of weather and calculation. His jaw was sharp, his eyes the color of rainwater, clear but cold. He walked with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime following orders. He knocked once, firm and controlled. Rowan opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" The man held up a badge. "Special Agent Marcus Keene, Federal Search and Response Division. You found something on federal property last week. I'm here to collect it." His voice was even, but carried the kind of weight that turned conversation into compliance. Rowan stepped aside. "Come in. Harbor found it." At the sound of his name, the dog stood, muscles tensing slightly. His ears pricked, and a low vibration rumbled in his chest. Keene froze. "That your dog?" "He's a rescue," Rowan said. The agent's eyes flicked to the tattoo in Harbor's ear. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Rescue, huh? Looks like one of ours." Rowan said nothing. She gestured toward the table. "That's the canister." Keene approached it, gloved hands steady. He examined it like a surgeon examining an organ, turning it over carefully. "You didn't try to open it?" "No," she said. "Didn't seem like mine to open." He nodded once, approving but guarded. "Good instinct. This holds operational data from the coastal unit. Flood records, maybe SAR communications." He slipped it into a black case. "Nothing anyone needs to worry about." His tone was casual. Too casual. Rowan had spent enough time around men in uniforms to know the difference between routine and evasion. Eli had moved closer, standing behind her leg. "Was my dad in the coastal unit?" he asked suddenly. Keene blinked, caught off guard. "Your father?" "Jonah Blake," Rowan said, keeping her voice calm. "He worked coastal rescue before the accident." He trained dogs sometimes, including Harbor. Keen's expression shifted, only slightly, but enough. He masked it fast. Blake. Yes, I remember the name. He set the case down, rubbing his jaw. He was one of the best. Tough loss. I was stationed in Portland then. Didn't know him well. It was a clean lie, smooth and rehearsed. Rowan's gut knew it the way the sea knows a coming storm. Harbor took a step forward, head low, eyes locked on Keen. A growl rumbled deeper this time. Not warning, but recognition. Keen's voice dropped. You should keep that animal calm, ma'am. He's calm, Rowan said evenly. You're the one making him nervous. The silence between them stretched thin, then broke when Keen exhaled. Look, I'll log this as a recovery and file it clean. You won't hear about it again. That fair? Rowan crossed her arms. Fair enough. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, but at the door, he paused. If Deputy Quinn stops by again, tell her the division's handling it now. She'll understand. When the SUV pulled away, the air in the cabin felt colder. Rowan looked down at Harbor. The dog's body was rigid, eyes still fixed on the window, as if watching something only he could see. Harbor, she whispered, crouching. Do you know him? The dog turned his head toward her, pressing his forehead lightly against her knee. The gesture was almost mournful. That night, Rowan couldn't sleep. The fire had died low, the cabin filled with the whisper of wind through cracks in the wall. She sat at the table again, staring at the empty spot where the canister had been. Something about Agent Keen's visit wouldn't leave her mind. The way he said recovery, like it meant more than it should. A soft knock startled her. It came from the back door this time, hesitant, not official. She opened it to find Caleb Shore, the fisherman neighbor, standing under the awning with a lantern. His face looked drawn, his beard damp from mist. Sorry to bother you this late, he said, voice low. You had a visitor earlier, government type. Rowan nodded. Said he was from the Federal Division. Caleb frowned. Did he take something? Yes. A canister from the outpost. He shifted uneasily, glancing over his shoulder. I used to do repair work for that facility back when it was still running. They weren't just training rescue dogs. Some of those animals were testing experimental tracking protocols, high-range signal tags, behavioral, conditioning. They were planning to transfer data through paired handlers. When the flood hit, they shut everything down overnight. Rowan's skin prickled. You're saying Harbor might have been part of an experiment? Caleb nodded slowly. Could be, and if that agent came back for old files, he's not just chasing paperwork. He's cleaning up what's left. Harbor appeared beside Rowan, silent, watching Caleb with alert curiosity. The fisherman crouched slightly, meeting the dog's eyes. He's smarter than most men I've worked with, he said softly. And if he growled at that agent, he had reason. Rowan swallowed. Why are you telling me this? Because I owe your husband, Caleb said, standing straight again. Jonah pulled me off a capsized rig in 17, risked his life when the currents were hell. I never got to thank him properly. When I saw his name in the paper after the crash, he stopped, clearing his throat. Let's just say I pay attention when his name comes back around. Rowan's throat tightened. Thank you, she said quietly. Caleb adjusted his beanie. Keep an eye out, Rowan. Federal men don't come up this far for lost property. If he shows again, don't be alone. She watched him walk back into the dark, the lantern light swinging like a heartbeat. Later that night, she sat by the stove, Harbor curled beside her, his head resting across her feet. Eli had fallen asleep upstairs, soft breaths steady. The room smelled faintly of smoke and salt. Rowan ran her hand along Harbor's back, feeling the faint ridge of healed scars beneath his coat. I think you remember more than you want to, she murmured. Harbor lifted his head, ears twitching toward the window. Outside, beyond the tree line, a faint hum drifted through the night, mechanical, distant, rhythmic. It wasn't thunder. Rowan stood, moving closer to the window. A single beam of light flickered once through the trees, then vanished. Harbor's growl rose low and certain. The quiet they had built in the cabin cracked a little that night, and in its place came the first trace of unease that would follow them into what lay ahead. The next morning broke without color. Mist hung low over the tree line, and the air tasted faintly of metal, like the breath before snow. Rowan barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the pale flash of that light between the pines and heard the low hum that didn't belong to wind or rain. Harbor had stayed awake most of the night, too, lying close to the door, head lifted every time the wind shifted. Now, as dawn crept in, he finally dozed, one ear twitching in uneasy half-sleep. Rowan moved quietly, setting water to boil. The stove clicked, the fire coughed, and she stared out through the window's frost-rimmed glass toward the woods. Nothing moved. Still, the feeling remained, that unseen presence, deliberate and patient. Eli stumbled into the kitchen, wrapped in a flannel blanket, eyes puffy from sleep. "Was it thunder last night?" he asked. She forced a calm tone. "Probably. The storm must have brushed the ridge." He rubbed his nose. "Harbor didn't like it." "No," she said softly. "Neither did I." After breakfast, Rowan checked the back door. Mud had dried in thin arcs along the step. Not paw prints, not boots exactly, but deep impressions like someone had rested equipment or boxes there. The edges were sharp, recent. She touched one, felt the cold still inside the mark. Harbor came up beside her, nose twitching. His fur bristled faintly. She whispered, "You smell it too." Later that morning, as Rowan loaded the truck for a supply run into town, she noticed a figure at the edge of the drive. For a heartbeat, she thought it was Caleb, but this man was taller, leaner, with a posture that didn't belong to locals. He wore a heavy coat and a beanie pulled low. When he saw her watching, he turned and walked back toward the woods without a word. Rowan gripped the door handle until her knuckles paled. She started the engine, checked the mirror twice, and drove. Owl's Head looked almost peaceful that day. Fishermen at the docks, seagulls looping above the tide. But there was tension under the quiet, a sense that everyone knew something unspoken. Rowan parked near the lighthouse pie and stepped inside. The bell chimed, and the familiar scent of coffee and fried dough met her. Marlene was behind the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, gray hair frizzed by steam. Her sharp eyes softened when she saw Rowan. "You look like you've seen a ghost, hun." "Something close," Rowan said. "Sit. You want the usual?" "Yes, please, and something for Eli." While Marlene worked the griddle, Rowan told her about the visit from the federal agent, the missing canister, and the strange noise last night. She left out Caleb's warning. Some truths were better weighed carefully. Marlene listened in silence, her hands moving with mechanical grace. When Rowan finished, the older woman exhaled through her nose. "Marcus Keene," she said finally. "Haven't heard that name in a while. He used to come through here, back when the rescue station still ran. Always ordered black coffee and didn't tip." "You know him?" "I know the type," Marlene said. "Too polite to trust. Men like that don't leave things behind. They bury them." Rowan stirred her coffee. "He said the canister had flood records." Marlene gave a humorless chuckle. "Flood records my foot. I had friends working maintenance during those years. The federal boys tested all kinds of tracking systems out there. If they shut it down overnight, something went wrong." "Caleb told me the same," Rowan murmured. Marlene's expression softened. "He's a good man. Don't let that gruff voice fool you. Lost his wife young, same year the storm took the East Rigs. He's been half in the water ever since." She leaned closer. "You keep that boy close and that dog closer. If Harbor's part of whatever went wrong out there, he's your best warning before it comes knocking again." A sharp gust rattled the diner's window. Rowan glanced outside and froze. Across the street, a man leaned against a parked sedan, the same one from her driveway. He wasn't watching her directly, but his stance, hands in pockets, head tilted slightly, said he was waiting. "Marlene," she whispered. "That man outside." The diner owner turned discreetly, her face tightening. "That's not one of ours." She wiped her hands, voice lowering. "There's a back door through the kitchen. Go out that way if you need to. I'll call Nora." Rowan nodded, stood slowly, and left cash on the counter. As she walked to the back, the man outside turned his head just enough for her to glimpse his profile. Clean-shaven, pale scar, cutting from his temple to the corner of his jaw. His eyes, even from across the street, looked colorless. She didn't wait to see more. The drive back felt longer than usual. The road wound between trees still slick from melted frost. Every so often she checked the mirror, half expecting headlights. None came. Still, her pulse didn't slow until she reached the cabin and saw Eli and Harbor waiting on the porch. "Mom, you were gone forever," Eli said, running down the steps. "Harbor barked when he heard a car, but it wasn't you." "What car?" He pointed toward the tree line. "It stopped on the ridge, then left." Rowan felt her stomach tighten. She forced a smile. Probably just Caleb checking traps. But that night, the unease grew teeth. After Eli went to bed, Rowan sat near the fire, Harbor at her feet. Outside, the fog returned, thick, crawling low, smothering sound. She could feel the air press against the windows. At first, it was quiet. Then came the faint hum again, the same mechanical rhythm. Harbor's head shot up, ears forward. He growled low, throat vibrating against the floorboards. Rowan stood, heart pounding. "It's all right," she whispered. Though she didn't believe it, she turned off the lamp and watched through the window. A single shape moved beyond the yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, a flashlight beam sweeping in slow arcs. The light lingered on the truck, then the porch, then the window. Rowan ducked back, holding her breath. Harbor pressed close, muscles coiled. The figure stopped at the bottom of the steps. For a moment, all she could see was the faint outline of a coat and the glint of something metallic in his hand. Then, from outside, came a voice. Calm, controlled, familiar. "Mrs. Blake," Marcus Keene called softly. "We need to talk." Harbor barked once, loud and sharp. The figure stepped back but didn't leave. "Easy," Keene said. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I just need you to listen." Rowan opened the door a few inches. "You were told not to come back." "I didn't have a choice." His tone was tight now. "There's more at stake here than you understand. That canister, what was inside, it wasn't just data. It was command logs." "What kind of command logs?" "For the dogs. For the neural link program your husband worked on." The words hit her like cold water. "Jonah didn't tell me." "He couldn't," Keene said. "He signed clearance levels even I couldn't access. After the flood, the system went dark. But when Harbor reactivated near your property, the division picked up the signal again." Rowan felt dizzy. "Reactivated?" Keene took a cautious step closer. Something survived in him, an embedded tracking node tied to Handler's sync memory. If it's still live, it holds everything. Mission data, field patterns, even your husband's neural imprint. She shook her head. "That's not possible." "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but it's happening." He glanced toward the woods. "And you're not the only one looking for it." Before Rowan could reply, Harbor barked again. This time not at Keene, but at the dark line of trees. His entire body stiffened, tail rigid, hackles raised. A second beam of light flashed deeper in the forest. Another figure, then a third. Keene's voice dropped. "They followed me." "Who?" Rowan demanded. He looked at her, face grim. "People who don't want that dog, or what's in him, making it out of these woods." In the distance, the faint hum rose again, sharper now, layered with static. Harbor stepped forward, teeth bared, the low growl building in his chest like thunder. Keene drew a pistol from his coat, checking the chamber. "Get the boy," he said. "We're leaving. Now." The world outside had turned to shadow and noise. The mechanical hum deepened, echoing through the trees like something alive. Lights, white, sterile, not the color of flashlights, swept across the fog. Harbor growled low, the sound vibrating through the wooden floorboards as if the cabin itself could feel his fear. "Get Eli," Keene said again, voice clipped, not unkind but sharp with urgency. Rowan ran up the stairs, heart hammering. Eli was already sitting up in bed, clutching his stuffed orca, eyes wide. "Mom, the lights." "I know," she said, helping him into his coat. "We're going for a drive." Harbor barked once, deep and commanding, as if urging her to move faster. Downstairs, Keene had pulled back the curtain just enough to see the yard. "They're fanning out. 3 of them at least," he muttered. "Blackout visors, suppressors. These aren't my people." "Then whose are they?" Rowan demanded, grabbing the keys. He shook his head. "Could be rogue contractors. The program went private after the division shut down. Whoever's paying them now wants what's in that dog's head." He turned to Harbor, the old calm of a handler surfacing in his stance. "You remember me, don't you?" he said softly. Harbor's tail gave a slow, uncertain twitch. "Good," Keene murmured. "Then you'll know how to listen." The first crack of gunfire shattered the night, a muffled thud, not far from the porch. Harbor leapt to the door, barking fiercely. Keene grabbed Rowan's shoulder. "Back door, now!" They slipped out into the fog, the air thick with pine-softened smoke. Eli clung to Rowan's hand while Keene led them through the trees, moving with the precision of a man who had run from bullets before. Behind them, the cabin's windows flickered under the sweep of flashlights. "Where are we going?" Rowan whispered. "There's an old ranger trail past the ridge," Keene said. "If we can reach the bluffs, I can radio for help." They moved quickly but quietly, boots sinking into wet moss. The fog pressed close, muting everything except Harbor's panting and the hiss of breath. Once, Eli stumbled, but Keen caught him with surprising gentleness. "Easy, kid. Eyes on my steps." He was different out here, less government, more soldier, the clean lines of his face now streaked with mud, his jaw set, but not cruel. For a flicker, Rowan wondered what kind of man he might have been before the lies. When they reached a clearing, Keen stopped, holding up a hand. "Stay low." Rowan crouched, pulling Eli close. Harbor froze beside them, ears pivoting, nose to the wind. A faint electronic pulse buzzed overhead, steady, searching. Then, from behind the trees a drone appeared, small but heavy-bodied, moving in slow arcs with a scanning light. "They're using motion sensors," Keen whispered. "We can't outrun that on open ground." Rowan's pulse pounded. Then what? He scanned the tree line, eyes narrowing. Old maintenance tunnels from the flood response days. Caleb told me about them once. If they're still intact, they lead straight under the ridge. "Caleb?" "Your neighbor," Keen said. "He used to fix generator pumps for the outpost. I didn't think he'd remember me, but I remember him." They ducked into thicker woods, the trees closing like a cathedral of limbs. Harbor stayed ahead now, following scent trails only he understood. Twice he stopped, sniffed, then turned sharply, leading them left. Finally, they reached a slope half swallowed by roots and rock. Keen knelt, brushing away dirt until a rusted hatch appeared, barely visible. "Here," he said, prying it open with his knife. The metal groaned, the sound swallowed by fog. They climbed down into the dark, the air damp and mineral, walls lined with corroded pipes. The tunnel smelled of salt and oil. Harbor descended last, his body tense but silent, muscles rippling under his coat. Keen snapped a glow stick, flooding the narrow space with pale green light. "Stay close. These tunnels run toward the coast. If they haven't collapsed, we can surface near the docks." They walked in near silence, boots splashing through shallow water. Occasionally, Harbor stopped to sniff, ears flicking at distant echoes. Rowan kept one hand on Eli's shoulder and the other against the wall to steady herself. After several minutes, a new sound emerged, the faint, rhythmic drip of water mixed with a metallic hum deeper in the tunnel. Keen slowed, listening. "Generators," he murmured. "Someone's still powering this grid." "That can't be possible," Rowan said. "It is," Keen replied grimly. "Means we're not the only ones who know these tunnels exist." Suddenly, Harbor stopped dead. He growled, the sound deep and resonant. Keen raised his hand for silence. Ahead, faint light shimmered, a bluish flicker from a side chamber. He motioned for Rowan to stay back, then moved forward, pistol raised. Inside the chamber, rows of metal cabinets lined the wall, stamped with faded labels. Project Sinlink. Some were open, contents gutted. Others still glowed faintly from embedded control panels. And in the center stood a small portable generator, humming softly. Keen approached the nearest console, wiping grime from the screen. "This is it," he muttered. "The neural interface data core. They didn't dismantle it. They moved it underground." "What does it do?" Rowan asked. He hesitated. "It stores pair syncs between handlers and canines, essentially shared cognitive threads. Jonah Blake's file would have been among the last uploaded." Her breath caught. "You mean part of Jonah, his memory, could still be in there?" "In him," Keen said, glancing at Harbor. If the transfer completed, Harbor would carry fragments of his handler's neural imprint, emotional triggers, spatial recall, maybe even identity, markers. That's what they're after. Before Rowan could answer, the generator sputtered, then the hum of voices echoed down the tunnel, men shouting orders, boots splashing. Keen's face hardened. "They found us." He grabbed a metal case from the rack, smaller than a briefcase. "Backup drive. This holds the command keys. We can't let them take it." Harbor barked sharply as footsteps grew closer. Keen looked at Rowan. "There's another exit up ahead. Take the boy and the dog. Follow the left tunnel. It leads to the coast. I'll hold them off long enough to seal the door." Rowan shook her head. "You'll be trapped." He smiled faintly, tired but resolute. "I've been trapped before. This time I'm doing it for the right people. Keen, go!" He turned toward the entryway, weapon drawn. The last thing Rowan saw before the chamber filled with smoke and echoes of gunfire was Keen's silhouette, steady as stone. She ran, half dragging Eli, Harbor leading at full speed. The tunnel sloped upward, the air thinning, until finally a grate gave way above them, spilling cold salt air. They crawled out onto the rocky shore. The ocean stretched wide and black under the moonlight. Rowan collapsed onto the wet sand. Gasping, Eli clung to her, and Harbor stood between them and the tree line, his body tense, ears flat, watching. Somewhere in the distance, an explosion shook the ground, the tunnel collapsing. Then silence. Only the sea remained, endless and cold. Rowan pressed her face into Harbor's fur. "He bought us time," she whispered. The dog didn't move. He simply looked toward the forest, eyes gleaming faintly, waiting as if he still heard a voice only he could recognize. The sea was gray at dawn, the color of worn steel. Waves struck the rocks in rhythmic bursts, spraying cold mist that clung to Rowan's face and hair. She hadn't slept. None of them had. The explosion from the tunnels had died hours ago, leaving behind a silence that felt too heavy to be safety. Eli sat near the driftwood, wrapped in a blanket, Harbor beside him like a sentinel. The boy's small hand rested on the dog's back, fingers curling into his fur every time the waves crashed. The morning light caught on Harbor's coat, showing faint streaks of silver where the scars had healed. Rowan crouched nearby, scanning the horizon. The coastline stretched empty, just gulls, surf, and mist rising from the dunes. Her breath came out slow but shaky. She could still see Keen's face when he turned back toward the tunnel, steady, resolved, as though this ending was one he'd already accepted long before it came. The sound of an engine broke through the morning stillness. Rowan turned sharply, tension coiling in her shoulders. A white pickup truck appeared on the narrow coastal road, tires crunching over gravel. For a heartbeat, fear flashed, but then she recognized the dented fender. Caleb. He parked near the bluff and stepped out, his jacket zipped to the chin, a knitted cap pulled low. His beard was wet with sea mist, his expression grave but relieved when he saw them. "I saw the flash from town," he said, voice rough. "Figured it wasn't fireworks." Rowan rose to meet him. "They came last night. Keen. He didn't make it." Caleb's jaw tightened beneath the beard. He looked toward the distant ridge where a thin column of smoke still clung to the horizon. "Then he bought you a chance," he said quietly. "Come on, let's get you out of this cold." He led them to his truck, spreading an old wool blanket across the back seat for Eli and Harbor. The dog hesitated at first, eyes flicking toward the woods, but one quiet word from Rowan, "home," and he climbed in, pressing against Eli's side. The drive back into town was quiet, except for the rattle of loose chains in the truck bed. The fog thinned as they passed the harbor road, revealing boats rocking gently in their slips. Life seemed almost normal again, and that contrast made Rowan's chest ache. Caleb glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You should know. Word's going around that the division's packing up. Federal trucks rolled out of the old station at sunrise. Whatever they were looking for, they didn't find it." "They will," Rowan said. "Eventually." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then we make sure you're ready when they do." He brought them to his workshop on the edge of town, a large weathered barn smelling of salt, wood oil, and old varnish. Models of boats lined the shelves, each one carved with care and patience. Harbor's paws clicked softly on the wooden floor as he explored, nose twitching. Caleb moved to the back wall, pulling aside a tarp to reveal a heavy metal chest. "Found this years ago after the flood," he said. "Didn't open it till now." He knelt and flipped the latch. Inside were waterproof binders stamped with the faded emblem of the Coastal Rescue Command. Rowan's breath caught. "Jonah's unit." "Yeah, thought it might mean something to you." She opened one of the binders carefully. Inside were logs, training records, diagrams. In one folder, a photo. Jonah Blake standing beside a younger Harbor, both looking toward the camera. Jonah's grin was half shy, half proud, wind whipping through his dark hair. His uniform bore the same project code Keen had mentioned. Sin Link. Eli leaned closer. "That's Dad," he whispered. Rowan traced the photo's edge with her thumb, her throat tightening. He trained Harbor for search and rescue, but they did more than that, didn't they? Caleb nodded. "Jonah told me once that he was working on something that could let man and dog think together. I thought it was just his way of saying trust mattered more than orders." Rowan smiled faintly, tears threatening. He wasn't wrong. They spent the next hour sorting through the papers. Most were technical, sensor calibration, command protocols. But one file, marked Final Sync, held a single printed log entry. Handler, Blake, Jonah, K9 unit, Harbor, result, successful imprint transfer, partial memory echo, sustained post-disconnect. Rowan's pulse quickened. Partial memory echo? It means some part of Jonah's neural pattern stuck, Caleb said, reading over her shoulder. Probably emotional bonds, instinctive memory, things the machine couldn't strip. She looked at Harbor, who was now sitting near the open doorway, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You're carrying him," she whispered. As if in answer, the dog turned, walked to her, and pressed his head against her chest. Rowan closed her eyes, feeling the solid warmth of him. Alive, real, steady. For a moment, it was like Jonah was there too. By late afternoon, they drove back to the cabin. The front porch still bore bullet holes, and the air smelled faintly of burned pine. But the silence was different now, less threatening, more solemn. Harbor trotted ahead, tail low but calm, inspecting the damage like a soldier returning to the field. Eli followed him, stepping carefully over debris. "Can we fix it, Mom?" "Yes," Rowan said softly. "We'll fix it." Caleb unloaded supplies from the truck, boards, nails, kerosene, and a new door frame. "You'll need a few days to patch this place up," he said. "I'll help when I can." Rowan smiled. "You've done enough already." He shook his head. "Not yet. Your husband saved me once, remember? Maybe this is how I pay it back." They worked until the sun began to drop, painting the sea gold. Harbor stayed close, watching every movement. Occasionally, he'd look toward the tree line, ears twitching as though still on duty. But when Eli laughed, really laughed, chasing a loose feather through the yard, Harbor's gaze softened, and he wagged his tail once, deliberate and slow. As the sky darkened, Rowan lit the lantern and set it by the repaired window. The light glowed warm against the wood. Caleb stood at the edge of the porch, hat in hand. "You'll be all right here," he said quietly. Rowan nodded. "We will." Before leaving, Caleb reached down to scratch Harbor behind the ear. "You keep watch, old boy," he said. "You've earned your rest, but something tells me you're not done yet." When his truck disappeared down the road, Rowan sat on the porch steps, Harbor beside her, Eli curled against her shoulder. The sea murmured below, steady as breath. She spoke softly into the dusk. "Jonah, if you can hear us, we're home." Harbor lifted his head at the name, eyes reflecting the last traces of sunset. Then he turned toward the horizon and barked once, a deep, resonant sound that rolled over the cliffs and faded into the wind. It wasn't warning, it was answer. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly, in a second chance, in the loyal gaze of a creature that refuses to give up, or in the courage of a mother who keeps going when the road turns dark. Rowan, Eli, and Harbor's story reminds us that even after the flood, after the fire, after the deepest night, God still plants light in the ashes. When we lose what we thought defined us, He sends us something unexpected to guide us home. A sign of grace wrapped in fur, a child's laughter that heals, or a stranger who arrives just when we think we're alone. Maybe that's how God works, not through grand gestures, but through small mercies that whisper, "You are not forgotten." In our daily lives, we all face our own storms, moments when the future feels buried under fear or loss. But just as Harbor carried the memory of love inside him, we too carry pieces of divine hope within our hearts. That hope waits for us to notice it, to believe again, to take the next step forward. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need reminding that grace still finds us, even when we think we're lost. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and keep these stories of faith, love, and quiet redemption alive. May the Lord bless you and your family, keep your homes warm through every storm, and remind you, in every sunrise, in every heartbeat, in every loyal companion, that miracles are never gone. They're just waiting for us to see them.